10 сентября 2005 года на границе Брест с Польшей. 11 часов, уже автобусов больше 20.
Poland has been making its presence felt on the world stage in recent days, not just by name, but also by voice.
Usłyszałem to od wielu przywódców, z którymi rozmawiałem o potrzebie zorganizowania wsparcia dla całej flanki wschodniej, szczególnie dla Polski.
Following the Zapad military exercises, Warsaw closed its border crossing with Belarus, and that's when it all began. Thousands of vehicles and people were stuck at the crossing points, but those long queues were only the visible face of the crisis. The real blow fell on the world's second largest economy, because the gate Poland closed was China's most critical trade corridor to Europe. And now, that economic artery, generating $25 billion in revenue annually, has been severed by a single political decision. Poland's first and most obvious move targeted the Belt and Road Initiative, the backbone of China's economy. For years, Beijing had invested billions of dollars in rail transport as an alternative to traditional sea routes for shipping goods to Europe. This railway line was weeks faster than sea routes and significantly cheaper than air routes. Electronic goods, machinery, automobile parts, and countless consumer goods were reaching the heart of Europe via this line on trains departing from China. And the most critical bottleneck where this line entered Europe was the Małaszewicze terminal in Poland. This was a massive logistics hub where the Asian and European rail systems converged, and thousands of containers changed hands every day. On September 12, 2025, Poland effectively shut down the Małaszewicze terminal by closing major railway crossings such as Kuźnica-Hrodna, Siemianówka-Swislak, and Terespol Brest. Suddenly, the flow of goods from China, worth €25 billion annually, was cut off. As confirmed by Belarusian railway workers, the system was completely paralyzed. Thousands of containers began to languish in Belarusian warehouses and stations. For Beijing, this was not just a delay or a financial loss, it was dynamite planted at the very foundation of the One Belt, One Road project. The entire marketing strategy of the project was built on the promise of being fast, reliable, and stable. Poland's single decision showed the world how fragile these promises were, how trade routes are never purely economic, how vulnerable they are to political will, military tensions, and the national security concerns of a single country. Following this blow, diplomatic traffic immediately accelerated. Beijing tried to increase pressure on Warsaw. On September 15 to 16, 2025, a critical meeting took place between Polish Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski and Wang Yi, the head of Chinese diplomacy. The Chinese minister expressed his concern about the disruption to trade and demanded that the border be opened immediately. However, the response reflected the self-confidence of the new Poland and the new Europe. Sikorski refused to give a definite date for the opening of the border and clearly stated that the decision was related to Poland's national security. This was a rare show of defiance by a European Union member against the world's second largest economy. Poland knew it would not bow to China's economic power, because it now held a much stronger card. That trump card was the second and more deadly part of this double blow. Warsaw began using the closed border and the €25 billion in trade it had taken hostage as leverage to force China to take a position on Ukraine. Moreover, Polish diplomacy has openly stated this strategy in recent days without hiding it. On September 15, 2025, Foreign Minister Sikorski made another statement, issuing a clear call to China. Sikorski said that, "We invite China to make more efforts to end the war in Ukraine and to use its influence over Russia." Around the same time, Polish officials demanded that Beijing pressure its ally Belarus to stop its hybrid operations against the Polish border, namely, its policy of using irregular migrants as a weapon. This pressure pushed China into one of the most difficult diplomatic positions in its modern history. Beijing, which for years had acted as if it were neutral in the Ukraine war, quietly providing economic and technological support to Moscow while criticizing the West, was now being forced by Poland to drop its mask. On one side was the European Union, its largest trading partner and a vital economic corridor. On the other was Russia, which it viewed as a strategic ally against the West. Poland forced China to choose between these two interests, thereby compelling Beijing to reconsider the true cost of its alliance with Putin. Moreover, this price was not only diplomatic, but also very heavy in social, economic, and geopolitical terms. Because the closure announcement came in the early hours of the morning, it was already too late for many. Thousands of people, who learned about the border closure at the last minute, flocked to the Belarus-Poland border crossings with their passports, suitcases, and children. Some set out to keep their jobs, some to reach their families, and some simply to continue their lives in Europe. But what they found was massive steel barriers, armed border guards, and silent diplomatic lines. The first light of dawn revealed the silent face of a crisis. At the Brest Terespol, Siemianowka, and Kuźnica border crossings, vehicle queues stretched for miles. According to official records, at least 1,680 cars and 65 buses were stuck between the two countries without permission to cross. But these figures were only part of the story. Tens of thousands of people were still on the road. Convoys of vehicles from the interior of Belarus were stopped before they even reached the border. Belarusian security forces blocked the roads and forced drivers to turn back. But where would they turn back to? For most, there was no plan left, nor a way back. But the real storm broke at the heart of the logistics chain, because these border crossings, closed by Poland, were a vital artery carrying 90% of the land transport network established between China and the European Union. In 2024, cargo volume on this route grew by 10.6%, with the total value of goods transported exceeding 25 billion euros. This railway line had been a balancing factor against the slowness of sea transport and the high cost of air transport. Especially for e-commerce giants like Temu, Shein, and Alibaba, this line was the primary lifeline that ensured orders reached European customers within a few days. Poland's border closure not only affected trains carrying cargo on this line, but also crippled China's inland provinces, which were touted as its development miracle. Cities like Chongqing, Chengdu, and Xi'an in particular were industrial hubs that grew under China's Western opening policy. These cities produce high-tech products for the European market. For example, laptops, electric vehicle parts, smartphones, 5G hardware. And for these products, time was as valuable as money. While shipments by sea took an average of 30 to 40 days, rail transport revolutionized delivery times, reducing them to 12 to 14 days. For factories that produce on a made-to-order basis, this difference in speed was the line between losing or maintaining market share. With Poland closing its borders, these lines were suddenly blocked. Production in factories has slowed down, warehouses are full to capacity, shipments to European buyers have been halted, contracts have been cancelled, and billions of yuan in penalties have begun due to delays. And worst of all, the perception that Chinese goods equals fast and reliable has been shaken. Trust, the cornerstone of trade, is now giving way to suspicion. A European importer, when placing a new order, asks, "If Poland wakes up one morning and closes its borders, how many weeks will I have to wait for these products?" The next and most frightening stage of this economic crisis for Beijing is its potential to turn into a social crisis. The legitimacy of the Chinese Communist Party is built on its promise of continuous economic growth and increased prosperity for its people. When this contract is broken, the party's authority is also shaken. Now imagine, what happens when production slows down in those giant factories in Chongqing? First, shifts are reduced, bonuses are cut. If the crisis deepens, layoffs begin. Millions of workers suddenly find themselves facing loss of income and uncertainty. This situation is not just an economic problem, but also a social time bomb ready to explode. The anger of millions of people who have lost their jobs and fear for their future can easily spill onto the streets. A wave of protests, starting in the western provinces, could spread to other parts of China. This is Beijing's worst nightmare. A decision taken thousands of miles away in Poland has come to directly threaten China's internal stability, that is, the survival of the Communist Party. But this crisis did not only harm China, things were also shaken up in Poland. PKP Cargo, which is controlled by the state, warned that the delays were manageable, but if the border remained closed for a long time, trade could be diverted via Kazakhstan, Caspian Sea, Black Sea, Turkey. The irony is this. Just a week before Poland made the decision to close the border, it had ceremoniously launched the first Warsaw-China freight train, carrying cargo from all over Europe. This route was vital to cementing Poland's key role in the Europe-China logistics equation. But now, the same country has disabled these routes at the push of a button. Artur Kolysiak, Director of Strategic Projects at the Polish Transport Association, summarized the scale of the crisis as follows. The complete closure of the border is devastating not only for transport but for the entire economy. Approximately 10,000 Belarusian drivers are currently unable to return to their jobs in Poland. Some are even unable to reach their own country. This closure has other dramatic consequences. Time-sensitive cargo such as medicines and food is blocked. Alternative routes, such as shipments via Lithuania or Latvia, may be possible, but both the time and cost will increase. Moreover, there is no guarantee that these alternative routes will always remain open. With this move, Warsaw has not only intervened in an economic corridor, but has also sent three very clear messages to Beijing, and thus to the whole world, on three separate levels. Each of these messages offers clues as to what kind of foreign policy and security doctrine Europe might adopt in the future. Poland's first and perhaps most radical message is this. If China wants to continue trading freely in Europe, it must distance itself from actors that threaten Europe's security. This statement is the expression of a new doctrine that fundamentally shakes the principle of separation of trade from politics, which has remained valid until now. Warsaw is questioning the billions of euros China earns through the European market. If these profits are used, directly or indirectly, to support aggressive actors such as Russia, then this trade route is illegitimate. The step taken by Poland here is not just an economic sanction, but a declaration that outlines a new security architecture for the European continent. It is saying clearly to China, if stability is disrupted at our borders, your trains will stop too. This is a turning point where security and trade in Europe are linked in such a clear manner for the first time. The second message is directed directly at China's strategic partnership with Moscow. For years, the Chinese government has maintained that it is not directly involved in the war in Ukraine, while in the background, its economic and technological support for Russia has paved the way for the war to continue. This chain of support, ranging from microchips to industrial equipment, energy investments to SWIFT alternatives, has been one of the vital elements keeping Russia's war machine running. Poland's message is this. This partnership is neither neutral nor inconsequential. Now you will pay the price. This is not merely a diplomatic warning, it is geopolitical blackmail that has translated into tangible, concrete costs. Poland is targeting one of China's weakest points, its trade route with Europe. The strategy employed here is extremely sophisticated. China is now beginning to pay the price for its support of Russia in the European market. Poland now has not only border gates, but also its commercial reputation as a weapon. With this decision, China is now directly experiencing how its relations with Moscow resonate in Europe. Perhaps the most striking message is Poland's clear statement about its own position. Warsaw is no longer on the geopolitical periphery of Europe, but at its strategic center. This crisis has also invisibly shifted the balance of power in Europe. Poland has not only stood up to external threats, but has also strengthened its own regional leadership role. In contrast to the timidity of Berlin and Brussels, Poland has managed the crisis, closed its borders, stood up to China, and acted in coordination with its allies. This raises the question, who is guarding Europe's eastern gates? Brussels, Paris, Berlin, or Warsaw? With this move, Poland has effectively answered that question. When it comes to the continent's security, it is no longer just the major capitals, but also the states along the border that are the actors shaping, directing, and determining the stance. This is the most concrete indication that the states on Europe's eastern flank are no longer just a buffer zone, but have become active geopolitical players. In addition to all this, the crisis has fundamentally shaken relations between all parties. Polish-Chinese relations will never be the same again. Beijing sees Warsaw as an unreliable and hostile actor. Poland, on the other hand, has positioned China as a power that is complicit in Russia's crimes and threatens security. Relations will be built on mutual distrust and a period of tough bargaining. Poland will use this leverage to the fullest. This crisis is putting the unlimited friendship between Moscow and Beijing to its toughest test. For the first time, China is paying a direct and significant economic price because of Putin's war. Beijing will not abandon Moscow in public. However, behind closed doors, pressure from Chinese diplomats on their Russian counterparts to end this instability will increase more than ever. Because Putin's war is damaging China's trade and internal stability. This creates an inevitable conflict of interest between the two allies. Belarus, meanwhile, has become nothing more than a pawn in this equation. The instability created by Lukashenko is damaging to China's project, making him an unreliable partner and a liability in Beijing's eyes. Ultimately, this double blow from Warsaw has brought Beijing to a crossroads. China will either increase pressure on Russia to protect its economic interests and help end the war, or continue to support its strategic ally and risk losing the European market. In either case, the winner will be Poland, which has boldly rewritten the rules of the game, and Ukraine, which it supports. The tragedy of thousands of people waiting at the border has gone down in history as the most tragic cost of this ruthless geopolitical chess game. So what do you think? Will Poland's strategy succeed? Will China turn its back on its ally Russia for the sake of trade? Share your thoughts in the comments. To stay updated on new videos, please subscribe to our channel and don't forget to turn on notifications. Thank you for watching.